Alpha King Deaf Daughter never spoke. Until Omega signed, I see you, and hearts shifted. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. Kingston Storm, known as the Alpha King, ruled with both strength and authority. His imposing figure and unwavering leadership made him a figure of respect, even fear, within his kingdom. Yet, behind that formidable exterior, Kingston was a father who loved his daughter more than anything in the world. His daughter, Sophie Storm, was his greatest pride, but also his greatest concern. Sophie, unlike most children, had been born deaf, and from a young age, she faced the challenges that came with it. She never spoke, not because she couldn't, but because no one could understand her. Kingston, in his powerful role, couldn't bear to see her struggle, but despite his efforts, he couldn't bridge the silent gap between them. Sophie lived in a world of silence, often watching the world around her, longing for connection, but never quite finding it. She wasn't like other children. She didn't make friends easily, and communication was always a barrier. It was a lonely existence, one that seemed impossible to overcome. But everything changed the day Zoe Harper arrived. Zoe was a quiet, unassuming woman, skilled in the art of sign language, someone who had come to the kingdom not to seek power or fame, but to teach children with special needs. Sophie had heard about her, of course, everyone had. The rumors swirled about the mysterious new teacher who had the ability to communicate with those who lived in silence. At first, Sophie was skeptical. No one had ever truly understood her before, and she wasn't sure anyone ever could. But Zoe didn't give up. Zoe's first encounter with Sophie was simple, a gentle smile and a sign, "I see you." Sophie had never heard those words, but in that moment, something inside her shifted. For the first time, someone truly saw her. And that small gesture, that simple act of understanding, would be the beginning of an unbreakable bond. As the days passed, Sophie began to open up. Zoe's patience and kindness allowed Sophie to feel something she had never felt before: connection. Slowly, Sophie learned to communicate, not with words, but with her hands, with her heart. Every sign Zoe made, every conversation they had, was a step towards Sophie breaking free from her silent world. It was as if Zoe had unlocked a part of Sophie that had always been there, but had been hidden away. For the first time, Sophie felt like she wasn't alone. Kingston watched as his daughter's demeanor changed. Sophie, once distant and quiet, began to smile more. She started to communicate, to express herself in ways Kingston had never imagined possible. He could see the change in her eyes, the hope that had been absent for so long. The bond between father and daughter was growing stronger, and Kingston knew that Zoe Harper had played a pivotal role in it. But there was still a long road ahead. Sophie had taken the first steps, but the journey was far from over. It would take time, effort, and understanding for Sophie to truly find her voice, not just in words, but in the world around her. And through it all, Zoe would be there, guiding her, showing her that no matter the barrier, connection was always possible. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie's progress was more than Kingston could have ever hoped for. Each time Sophie communicated with Zoe, it was like watching a small flower bloom, opening up to the world around her. The once lonely girl, who had lived her life in silence, was now starting to interact with those around her, even those who didn't understand sign language. Sophie began to share more of herself, not just with Zoe, but with her father too. It was still a slow process, but every smile, every sign, every moment of connection felt like a victory. Kingston could hardly believe the change in his daughter. His heart swelled with pride every time he saw her sign, "I love you," to Zoe. He had never heard her say the words, but he knew that in Sophie's world, those simple signs were just as powerful. One afternoon, after a lesson, Sophie sat with her father on the balcony of their grand home, gazing out at the kingdom. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light across the rolling hills. Sophie looked at her father, her eyes bright with a mix of curiosity and wonder. She signed something, her hands moving gracefully through the air. Kingston, who was still learning the basics of sign language, struggled to keep up, but Sophie was patient, guiding him with gentle hands. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Sophie signed again, slower this time, her hands forming the words with care. "I see the sunset, Daddy," she signed, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the evening sky. Kingston's heart swelled with emotion as he watched his daughter communicate so freely. It was a moment he had never imagined could happen. Sophie had always been distant, even before she could speak. But now, she was sharing her thoughts, her feelings, and her observations. It was like a door had been opened, and there was no going back. Sophie wasn't the only one who had changed. Kingston felt a shift in himself too. As he learned to understand his daughter's language, he began to appreciate the world in new ways. The silence that had once separated them was no longer a barrier. Instead, it had become a bridge, connecting them in ways words could never achieve. That evening, as father and daughter sat together, the quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, a testament to the bond they were building. In the days that followed, Sophie continued to blossom. She started to express herself more freely, signing her thoughts and dreams to Zoe, who listened with unwavering attention. Kingston continued to support his daughter in every way he could, attending every session with Zoe, learning from her, and growing alongside his daughter. But as Sophie's confidence grew, so did her desire to connect with others. She began to seek out other children who were not deaf, but who could still learn sign language. She didn't want to be isolated anymore. Sophie wanted to be part of something bigger than herself. One afternoon, Kingston found Sophie in the garden, sitting with a group of children, laughing and signing together. His heart skipped a beat as he watched her, surrounded by friends, her face alight with joy. Sophie had come so far, and it was all thanks to Zoe. Kingston didn't know where they would go from here, but he knew one thing for sure. His daughter was no longer the silent, lonely girl she once was. Sophie was finding her voice, and with it, her place in the world. As time went on, Sophie's transformation became even more remarkable. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and so did her connection with the world around her. Kingston could see the changes in her, not just in the way she communicated, but in her demeanor, in the way she interacted with others. Sophie, once a quiet and isolated girl, was now part of something bigger, something beautiful. She spent more and more time with Zoe, who had become not only a teacher but a trusted friend. Sophie found solace in their quiet conversations, and Zoe, in return, found joy in helping Sophie find her voice, however that voice was expressed. It wasn't just about sign language anymore. It was about a deep, unspoken understanding between the two of them. Sophie had learned to express her emotions in new ways, and Zoe had learned to listen with more than just her ears. It was a language of the heart, one that went beyond words. One afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the trees, Sophie asked Zoe a question, her hands moving hesitantly at first. "Why did you come here, Zoe?" "To help me," she signed, her eyes searching Zoe's face for an answer. Zoe paused for a moment, her fingers stilling in the air, and then she smiled softly. "I came because I believe that no one should be left behind," Zoe signed gently. "I came because I see you, Sophie. I see you in a way that no one else does." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion as she absorbed Zoe's words. She felt seen, truly seen for the first time in her life. It was a moment of pure connection, a moment that no one else could understand. But Sophie didn't need anyone else to understand. She had Zoe, and that was enough. Kingston, watching from a distance, felt a deep sense of gratitude for Zoe. She had given Sophie something that he, as a father, could not. She had given her the ability to communicate, to truly connect with others. It was a gift he could never repay, but he was more than willing to try. Over the following weeks, Sophie continued to flourish. She spent time with the other children, teaching them sign language, and in return, they shared their world with her. The once silent girl now laughed and played with her peers, her hands flying through the air as she taught them the language that had opened up so many doors for her. Sophie had found a new family, one built on understanding, compassion, and connection. Zoe remained by her side, guiding her through each step of her journey. But the relationship between Zoe and Sophie was no longer just teacher and student. It had become something deeper, something that could not be easily defined. They were friends, confidants, and, in many ways, sisters. The bond between them had become unbreakable, and neither of them could imagine life without the other. One day, as the autumn leaves began to fall, Sophie and Zoe sat on a bench in the garden, watching the world around them. Sophie signed something, her hands moving slowly, thoughtfully. "Thank you," she signed, her eyes meeting Zoe's. Zoe smiled and signed back. "I'm just glad I could be here with you, Sophie. You're not alone anymore." Those words, simple yet powerful, echoed in Sophie's heart. She wasn't alone. She never had to be alone again. And for the first time in her life, Sophie truly believed that. She had found her place in the world, a place where she was understood, a place where she belonged. As the days grew colder, the bond between Sophie and Zoe continued to deepen. Sophie had not only found her voice, but had also begun to understand the world around her in ways she never had before. The days of silence were becoming a distant memory, replaced by laughter, signs, and moments of pure connection. Sophie was no longer the shy, withdrawn girl who had once been trapped in a world of isolation. She was blossoming, flourishing, and for the first time, she felt truly seen. Her relationship with Zoe had evolved beyond that of a teacher and student. Zoe was her mentor, her guide, and above all, her friend. Their conversations flowed easily now, and they would often sit for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and hopes. They could talk about anything. Nothing was off limits. Zoe had become Sophie's safe space, the person she could turn to for comfort, for advice, and for understanding. But despite all the progress Sophie had made, there was still a part of her that felt uncertain. She had always been surrounded by people who didn't fully understand her, and while Zoe had brought her out of the shadows, Sophie couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly be accepted by others. One crisp morning, as Sophie was practicing her signs with Zoe, she stopped suddenly and looked up at her friend with a question in her eyes. "What if no one else understands me?" she signed hesitantly. Zoe paused, her gaze softening as she took Sophie's hands in hers. "Sophie," she signed gently, "it doesn't matter if they understand you at first. What matters is that you understand yourself. And I see you. You're not alone." Sophie's heart swelled with emotion as she looked into Zoe's eyes. For the first time, she felt like she didn't need anyone else's approval. She had Zoe's support, and that was enough. With Zoe by her side, Sophie felt ready to face the world, to step outside of the safe bubble they had created together. Sophie began to attend more social events, encouraged by Zoe and her father. At first, she was nervous, unsure of how others would react to her. But to her surprise, people were kind. They didn't judge her for the way she communicated. Instead, they were curious, eager to learn from her, to understand her language. It was a new experience for Sophie, one that was both exciting and intimidating. But with every interaction, she grew more confident, more certain that she was capable of navigating this new world. Kingston watched from the sidelines, his heart filled with pride as he saw his daughter thriving. He had always worried about Sophie's future, but now, he saw a girl who was ready to take on the world. Sophie's resilience, her strength, and her courage were qualities that Kingston had never expected to see in her. She had taught him as much as he had taught her. As the weeks passed, Sophie's social circle expanded, and she found herself surrounded by new friends, people who valued her for who she was, not just for her ability to communicate in sign language, but for her kindness, her intelligence, and her heart. Sophie had found a community, a family beyond the one she had been born into. It was a family that embraced her for everything that she was, and Sophie realized, for the first time in her life, that she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She was enough. One evening, as Sophie and Zoe sat together watching the stars, Sophie signed a question to her friend, her hands moving slowly. "What will happen when you leave?" Sophie asked. Zoe smiled, her eyes glimmering with understanding. "I'll never truly leave you, Sophie. I'll always be with you, in your heart, in your language. You've found your voice, and no one can take that away from you." Sophie smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had found more than her voice. She had found herself. As winter approached, a new chapter unfolded for Sophie and her family. The holidays brought with them a sense of renewal, and for the first time in years, Sophie felt like she was part of something larger than herself. Her world, once quiet and isolated, was now filled with soundless conversations, laughter, and a sense of belonging. Sophie and Zoe continued their journey together, and the connection between them grew stronger with each passing day. The two of them spent countless hours sharing stories, dreams, and ideas. It was clear that Sophie's world had expanded in ways she had never thought possible, and much of that was thanks to Zoe's unwavering support. One crisp December evening, as the fireplace crackled in the background, Sophie sat beside her father, Kingston, and Zoe. The warmth from the fire filled the room, and the faint scent of pine from the Christmas tree added to the cozy atmosphere. For the first time in a long while, Sophie felt completely at ease. She wasn't hiding in the shadows, and she wasn't afraid of the future. For the first time, she was confident in who she was. Sophie turned to Kingston, her eyes shining with gratitude. She sighed, "Thank you, Daddy, for always being there for me." Kingston smiled warmly, his heart full. He didn't need to understand the exact words Sophie sighed. He had learned the meaning through her actions, her growth, and the love they shared. "You're my daughter, Sophie," he signed back. "There's nothing I wouldn't do for you." In that moment, Sophie realized just how much her father had sacrificed for her. He had always been there for her, even when it seemed like there was no way to reach her. He had never given up, and now, they were finally starting to bridge the gap that had once kept them apart. Later that evening, as the family sat down for their holiday dinner, Sophie felt a warmth in her heart that she had never known before. She looked around the table, at the people who had helped her become who she was today. She saw Kingston, who had always been her protector, and Zoe, who had given her the gift of communication and understanding. For the first time, Sophie truly felt like she belonged. As they ate and talked, Sophie shared stories of her newfound friends and the adventures they had been on together. She spoke of the joy she found in teaching others sign language, and the excitement she felt every time someone understood her. It wasn't just about the language anymore. It was about the connections she was making, the relationships she was forming. Sophie was no longer the girl trapped in her own world. She was part of the world around her. After dinner, Zoe took Sophie aside for a quiet conversation. They walked outside into the crisp night air, the snow crunching underfoot. Zoe turned to Sophie and sighed, "I'm so proud of you, Sophie. You've come so far, and I know this is just the beginning for you." Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Zoe," she signed back. "You showed me that I could be more than what I thought I was." Zoe's eyes glimmered with pride as she signed. "You always had it in you, Sophie. You just needed someone to help you see it." Sophie nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of gratitude. She had found her voice, her place, and most importantly, herself. As they stood together under the stars, Sophie knew that she was ready for whatever came next. With Zoe by her side and her family's love to guide her, she was prepared to take on the world, one sign at a time. As the new year arrived, Sophie found herself on the cusp of a new beginning. The world, once a place of silence and isolation, was now filled with possibilities, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly living. Sophie's life had changed in ways she never imagined possible, and she was ready to embrace the future. The more she grew, the more confident she became, not just in her ability to communicate, but in her place within the world. With the support of her father, Kingston, and her devoted friend, Zoe, Sophie had learned that she was capable of so much more than she had ever realized. But even with all the progress she had made, Sophie still faced challenges. Every now and then, doubt would creep in. She would wonder if she truly belonged in a world that hadn't always understood her. Those thoughts were fleeting, but they existed nonetheless. Sophie's greatest strength had always been her ability to persevere, to keep going even when the path ahead seemed unclear. And as she sat one evening, surrounded by the warmth of her family, Sophie realized just how far she had come. It was a quiet moment, the kind she had never experienced before. Peaceful, filled with contentment, and most of all, with love. Zoe was sitting beside her, as always, their hands moving together in conversation. Sophie had grown so much in her understanding of herself and the world around her, and she could now communicate freely with Zoe. It was no longer just about learning words or signs. It was about sharing pieces of their hearts. It was a bond that went beyond communication. It was a deep, unspoken connection. Sophie signed to Zoe, "I don't feel alone anymore." Zoe smiled softly, her eyes full of warmth. You never were alone, Sophie. You just needed to see it. Sophie nodded, her heart full of emotion. She knew Zoe was right. All her life, she had felt like an outsider, but now she knew that she had a place in this world, a place where she was seen, where she was loved. The following weeks brought new experiences for Sophie. With Zoe by her side, she began to take on more leadership roles, helping others who struggled to communicate. She became a mentor, showing them the same kindness and patience that Zoe had shown her. She was no longer the girl who needed help. She was the one offering it. Sophie found immense joy in teaching others, in sharing the gift of communication that had changed her life. It wasn't just about giving people the ability to sign. It was about helping them connect with others, to be understood in a world that often felt too loud and overwhelming. Sophie felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. In the quiet moments, when she sat alone with her thoughts, Sophie thought about her father. Kingston had always been her rock, her protector, but now, she saw him differently. He had given her the tools she needed to thrive, but he had also given her something more, his unwavering belief in her. He had always been there, standing by her side, and now, Sophie realized that she was ready to stand on her own. As she looked back at how far she had come, Sophie felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people who had helped her along the way. Kingston, who had never given up on her, and Zoe, who had shown her that love and communication were possible even in the absence of words. Together, they had helped Sophie find her place in the world. And as she faced the future, Sophie knew that no matter what came next, she would always have her voice, her true voice, and the strength to keep moving forward. As spring arrived, Sophie found herself more confident than ever. She had fully embraced the changes in her life, and it was clear to everyone around her that she had transformed into someone who was not just surviving, but thriving. Her once silent world had been replaced by vibrant conversations, both spoken and signed. Sophie no longer hid in the shadows of uncertainty. She stood tall, proud of who she had become. The small moments of growth had blossomed into something beautiful, and Sophie knew that she was ready for whatever came next. Sophie had spent the past few months helping other children learn sign language, guiding them through the same challenges she had faced. Each time she saw someone else light up with understanding, Sophie felt a sense of fulfillment that was beyond words. She was finally giving back, and in doing so, she was learning even more about herself. It wasn't just about helping others communicate. It was about empowering them to find their voice, to find the confidence she had worked so hard to build. Zoe, who had always been her closest friend and mentor, was by her side through it all. The two of them worked together, teaching, laughing, and sharing stories. Zoe had become like family to Sophie, someone who not only understood her language, but also understood her heart. Their bond had only deepened with time, and Sophie knew that no matter where life took her, Zoe would always be there, a constant source of love and support. One evening, as Sophie and Zoe sat by the window, watching the sun set behind the hills, Sophie turned to Zoe, her hands moving slowly as she signed. Do you ever wonder what the future will look like for me? Zoe smiled gently, taking Sophie's hands in her own. The future is full of possibilities, Sophie. You've already come so far, and I have no doubt that you'll keep moving forward. Your voice is powerful, and you have so much to offer the world. Sophie nodded, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her. She had always been afraid of the unknown, but now, with Zoe's words echoing in her mind, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The next few weeks brought new opportunities for Sophie. She had been invited to speak at a local school about the power of communication and the importance of inclusion. At first, she was nervous, unsure if she could stand in front of a crowd and share her story. But Zoe, as always, encouraged her. You've already done so much, Zoe sighed, her eyes filled with encouragement. This is just another step on your journey. The day of the presentation arrived, and Sophie stood in front of a classroom full of students, all eyes on her. Her hands trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and began. She shared her journey, from the isolation she had once felt to the empowerment she now carried with her every day. She talked about the power of sign language, of being seen and understood, and of how love could break through the walls of silence. As she spoke, Sophie felt a sense of peace wash over her. The room was quiet, But in that silence, Sophie knew she was making an impact. When she finished, the students gave her a standing ovation. Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had faced her fears, and in doing so, she had inspired others to find their own voices. Later that evening, as she sat with Kingston and Zoe, Sophie reflected on how far she had come. Her father, who had always been her rock, smiled proudly at her. "You're not just my daughter anymore." Kingston sighed, his voice filled with love. "You're a teacher, a leader. You've found your voice, and now, you're helping others find theirs." Sophie's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of gratitude. She had come so far from the silent, isolated girl she once was. And now, she was ready to keep moving forward, to keep sharing her story, and to keep helping others find their own path to connection. With Zoe by her side and her father's love to guide her, Sophie knew that there was no limit to what she could accomplish. Months passed, and Sophie's life seemed to be unfolding in ways she could never have imagined. The girl who had once struggled to find her place in the world was now standing tall, not only for herself, but for others. Sophie had become an inspiration, a beacon of hope for those who, like her, had once felt lost in silence. It wasn't just about learning to communicate anymore. It was about creating connections, bridging gaps, and proving that no matter what barriers you faced, you could overcome them. Sophie's relationship with her father, Kingston, continued to grow stronger. He had always been her protector, but now he saw her as something even greater, a woman who was capable, independent, and ready to face the world. He had watched her transform from a quiet, isolated child into a young woman who was ready to make a difference. Kingston could not have been prouder of the woman Sophie was becoming. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Kingston raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To Sophie," he signed, "the daughter who has taught me more than I could ever teach her." Sophie smiled, feeling the warmth of his words. It was in moments like these that she felt the depth of the love between them, unspoken, but always present. The next morning, Sophie woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She had been asked to speak at a national conference on communication and inclusivity. It was an opportunity she had once dreamed of but never thought possible. But now, with the confidence she had gained over the years, Sophie was ready. Zoe, who had always been by her side, was just as excited. She had seen the potential in Sophie from the very beginning, and now, Sophie was about to show the world what she was capable of. The day of the conference arrived, and Sophie stood backstage, her heart racing. Zoe placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've got this," Zoe signed, her smile warm and confident. Sophie nodded, taking a deep breath. She had come so far. She was no longer afraid of speaking her truth. As Sophie walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Hundreds of people waited for her to speak, to share her story. Sophie's hands moved with grace as she signed, sharing her journey from silence to self-discovery. She spoke of the importance of inclusion, of seeing others for who they truly were, not just by the way they communicated. As Sophie spoke, she felt a sense of calm. The nerves she had felt earlier disappeared as she connected with the audience in a way she never thought possible. She wasn't just speaking words, she was sharing her heart. The room was captivated, hanging on every sign she made. When Sophie finished, there was a brief silence, and then the entire audience stood, applauding. Sophie's heart swelled with pride, but more than that, it was filled with a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced her fears and spoken her truth, and in doing so, she had inspired others to do the same. That night, as Sophie sat with Zoe, she reflected on how far she had come. She had been given the opportunity to share her story, to make a difference, and to help others see the power of connection. Sophie knew her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. With her father's unwavering love, Zoe's constant support, and her own inner strength, Sophie knew she was ready to face whatever came next. She had found her place in the world, and nothing could take that away. The months continued to pass, and Sophie's life blossomed even more. She was no longer the girl who had once felt lost in a world of silence. She had become a woman who had found her voice and had made a difference in countless lives. Sophie's journey had taken her places she had never imagined. From being the silent daughter of the Alpha King to becoming a leader, an advocate for those who struggled with communication, Sophie had grown into someone powerful. someone who could change the world. Her relationship with her father, Kingston, had deepened, too. They were no longer just father and daughter. They were partners in this journey, supporting each other, learning from one another. Kingston had always been there for Sophie, but now, he had seen her transform into someone who was capable of leading, of inspiring. He was proud of the woman she had become, and Sophie, for the first time, could see the respect in his eyes, not just as a father, but as a mentor, too. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Sophie sat with Zoe in their favorite spot, under the oak tree in the garden. The breeze was gentle, and the world felt calm. It was moments like these that Sophie cherished the most, when everything felt at peace, when she could truly reflect on how far she had come. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," Sophie sighed, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately. Zoe smiled, her heart full of pride for the woman Sophie had become. "I know you are," Zoe signed back. "You've always had everything you needed within you. You just had to find it." Sophie nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never felt so sure of herself before. It had taken years of work, of overcoming doubts and fears, but Sophie had finally become the person she was always meant to be. And she was ready to face whatever came next with the same strength and courage that had carried her this far. The next chapter of Sophie's life was waiting, and she was prepared to write it herself. She began traveling to other cities, speaking at conferences, and working with different organizations to promote inclusion and communication. Everywhere she went, people listened. Sophie's story resonated with everyone she met. She wasn't just talking about her own struggles. She was talking about the struggles of so many others who had been silenced by barriers, whether physical, emotional, or social. Sophie's words were powerful, but it was her actions that spoke the loudest. She spent time with those she met, helping them find their voice, just as Zoe had done for her. She didn't just teach sign language. She taught people to believe in themselves, to know that they, too, could overcome any obstacle in their path. One evening, as Sophie stood in front of a crowd at a new conference, she couldn't help but reflect on the path she had walked. The young girl who had once been afraid to speak up was now standing tall in front of a room full of people, sharing her message of hope, love, and empowerment. Sophie's eyes scanned the crowd, and she smiled. She had come so far, but the best part was that her journey was far from over. With Kingston's unwavering support, Zoe's constant encouragement, and her own inner strength, Sophie knew that she was just getting started. Her journey had only just begun, and with each new step, she would continue to make the world a better place, for herself, for others, and for those who would come after her.